I'm a 22-year-old female, and I grew up in this small, reserved community in Lake George, New York. I live with 3 siblings and my parents. Me being from New York State, I never really visited the city much. I went maybe twice as a kid, but I never really remembered much of my visits. When I graduated high school, me and my best friend, whom I'm now living with, thought it would be fun to take a small road trip down to New York City. It was just the 2 of us. We stayed for a weekend and had this really amazing time. It seemed more magical going to the city this time around than it did many years ago. I absolutely fell in love with the city life and wanted more than anything just to live there. I work real estate. It's not something I want to do or even thought I would do for a career, but me being 18 and money hungry, I thought I should just go for it and take that 77-hour class. I ended up getting my real estate license at 19, and I made pretty good money off doing it. After saving up, I decided to move to New York City, and it was the best decision that I could possibly have ever made. I was pursuing my real estate career down there and was renting out and selling properties like crazy. I lived alone, while my family and best friend were still upstate. It didn't really take long though before I adapted to living alone. I've always been super independent anyway. One day, I get home around 6 p.m. and was thinking about making myself some dinner because I went grocery shopping the night before. When I get all my groceries out to cook, I noticed there was a few things missing. I didn't think much of it as I blamed myself for probably forgetting something or using it already without even realizing it. I shrug it off and make dinner with the things that I had, as in I didn't really feel like going back to the store on that night. While I was winding down for bed later, I heard noises coming from inside my walls. I'm not sure what prompted me to think this, but I just thought that maybe it was mice or maybe rats. I'm not a very skeptical person, so I kind of forgot about it and said I'd take care of it the next day. Over the next few days though, things began getting weirder. Plastic water bottles from the case would randomly disappear. I noticed that my hygiene products were getting low very quickly. Food was still going missing. I started to get worried after this. I wanted to set up some cameras in my apartment to maybe catch what the problem was, but part of me didn't really want to know the answer to that. I couldn't sleep the next couple of nights. I kept hearing those god-awful scratching noises coming from inside my walls, and banging started occurring on the floor. I even swore up and down that I woke up to doors opening and closing one night. The sounds occurred at nighttime, not so much in the morning. Me being gone working during the day, I had no idea what could have gone on. But however, on this particular morning, it was early, maybe 5 a.m. It was still dark outside, and I heard noises again. I grabbed my phone and put 911 in the keypad, just in case, but didn't dial it yet. I started looking in all the rooms of my apartment. While looking, I heard this huge bang, and then didn't hesitate to call the police. Not long after that they arrived, I told them what had been happening, and they began searching for themselves. One of the officers called to the other side of the guest room. There was what looked like to be a crawl space in the back of the closet. One of the officers moved the board that was covering the entrance to the space and shone his flashlight inside. To my absolute shock and horror, the officer pulled out this scrawny, middle-aged white man out of that room. He looked absolutely cracked out. I had no idea how he could have even gotten there. The officer who found him put him in cuffs, while the other officer searched the room. He found drug paraphernalia, food wrappers, and weapons, such as a semi-automatic pistol and several other pocket knives, as well as some knives from my kitchen, not to mention a ton of my personal belongings. The officers said from their observation, it looked like the man had been living in that space for almost a week. If I didn't call the police that morning, I might have wound up dead. From that day on, I moved and promised myself I would never live alone again. Well, at least with an unwanted guest.
I worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. The place was isolated, situated next to a highway that connected 2 cities about an hour apart. Nothing but some empty fields and trees were in between. It would just be me there during the night shift. My job and why I had to be there was to check the levels, adjust equipment every now and then, and basically just make sure that everything was working and it wasn't going to blow up. During my shift, I would be inside an 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence which was locked, but the access door to the rest of the facility were always open. One night at about 2:30 or 3 a.m., I was sitting in my control room area killing time on my Nintendo DS. The sound of the game was the only thing breaking the silence, and I was halfway zoning out when I heard a voice from behind me. The voice shouted out to get on the ground. I turned around and saw a guy standing there behind me holding a gun. He must have climbed the barbed wire fence to get to me, because I could see he was bleeding from several locations on his body. I must have been taking a while to comprehend what was happening, because the man yelled to get on the ground again. I didn't hesitate this time, and I dropped to my knees. He kept the gun pointed at me as he stepped closer. I remember that he kept apologizing to me, saying that he was sorry, but he had to do this. I thought that maybe he had been hired to kill me by someone, and what could I have possibly done to deserve this? He began asking for my truck keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't argue, and I handed everything over. Next, he tied me up. He used some duct tape that was near my desk, wrapping it around my wrists and my ankles. I still had no idea if I was going to die soon, or maybe I was being kidnapped and that's why he was tying me up. After a few minutes, the guy backed away. He apologized again, and then he turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of my truck starting up, and then the tires crunching the gravel as he drove away. For a moment, I just sat there, totally in shock, trying to calm myself down. The duct tape wrapped around my wrists and ankles wasn't the greatest, and I was able to free myself after a while. I used the emergency phone at the water treatment facility and called the police, and they said they would send someone right away. When the cops came, they asked me a bunch of questions, wrote down everything I could remember, and arranged for a way home for me. The next day, I found out the guy was arrested in the town over. He'd apparently escaped from an inmate custody transport a few days before, and had been on the run ever since. The police said he was desperate, probably running out of options, and that he had likely walked a long way to get to the water plant. That made sense, considering how far in the middle of nowhere the plant was. I even got all my stuff back besides the cash in my wallet, because he had been caught trying to pawn off my stuff in the next town over. I think about that night often, and have had to go to some therapy for it. The man was obviously desperate, and maybe he had thought about killing me, since it would likely have given him more time to escape, as the cops would have been called much later. There have been some other strange occurrences that happened while I was working the night shift job, but this one was easily the scariest thing that I ever experienced there. I used to work night shifts at this large manufacturing facility. The night shift consisted of a very small crew, including 5 security workers and 5 of us doing administration and packing. As administration staff, I sat with security as they'd switch between patrolling and monitoring the cameras. It was usually silent and boring. One night near Halloween, I was halfway into my shift on my lunch hour break. It was chilly, and I went to my car to grab my bigger jacket and have a smoke break. I was right outside the back door where this fence is closest to the building. It's maybe 10 yards off the back door. The only light was motion activated, and I had to keep making grand arm movements to keep it on. It's all grass and shadows up to the fence, and the light doesn't really hit that far. I was watching videos on my phone, and the light went out from a lack of motion. I sat in the dark a bit, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I was finishing, I reached up and waved to activate the light to find the ashtray, but as the light flickered on, I heard a noise on the fence across from me. We do get some animals out there, and they could get startled, but as I stood up, I heard the fence keep slightly jiggling. When I looked up, I didn't see much. The light didn't really illuminate much outside its circle on the ground. My first thought was to say hello, which I did in a questioning tone. When I spoke, the sound stopped for a moment. I squinted into the darkness trying to adjust, but it was hard with the light on. However, once the light turned off again, the light from the moon had a little bit more effect lighting up the area. The fence started jiggling again. As my eyes adjusted better, I saw movement. It looked like a person opposite me at the fence fidgeting with the links. I thought this must be a kid just trying to spook us. Maybe they were going to break in and explore, which some kids had done before without knowing the building never closed. But it wasn't common, and this was one person, alone. I was worried, so I radioed to desk security with my walkie-talkie. I informed security that we had a visitor outside the fence on the north end of the building. I've seen the monitors of camera feed, and I know this area is totally covered by cameras. They would be able to check the fence clearly. My walkie beeped back, and the security guy said, "We aren't reading any movement at the fence. Is it in the tree line?" I responded back no, and they were fiddling with the fence right in front of me. The next events all happened so fast. Security didn't even have the chance to reply to me when from the fence, I heard this massively louder thrash of the lynx, and all I saw was a figure full-on sprinting at me. I spilled my coffee all over as I rushed back inside the building. I pushed myself inside and held the knob in place, trying to keep the deadbolt in place. The knob was flicking down hard against my hold. I could hear and feel something moving against the opposite side of the door. By the time security got down to me, I had the deadbolt in place, and the knob of the door was still now. I didn't understand why the security workers weren't taking me seriously while I explained the story, until I saw the playback from the cameras. It was just me outside. There was nothing there. I immediately thought this was a big prank on me, but everyone else genuinely thought that I was the one fooling them. Upon watching the footage a second time more closely, however, we noticed the way the door handle kept moving even when I removed my hand from it. Both the inside camera and outside caught it. We also noticed right before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence made a slight jolt as if it was pushed. There were no holes in the fence or any kind of cuts made where somebody could squeeze through. There were no creepy shadows or unexplained wisps of smoke or light or movement besides those. Nobody there wanted to admit anything happened to me. Everyone came up with logical explanations like it was tricks of the moonlight, an overactive imagination, or too much coffee. I didn't want to argue about it. They already thought that I was being weird about it. I went about finishing my shift, but nobody used the back door again that night, and it remained locked. The longest employed security employee was finishing up his shift at the desk with me in the office that night. A few minutes before clocking out, he cleared his throat and told me, "I never really liked that north end. It feels like someone's eyes are always on me." It's honestly the most he's ever said to me in the years plus I worked there, the most I ever heard him say. I felt like the statement held even more weight from that alone. I worked there another 7 months and never had another incident. I never actually went out there again though. I stopped smoking, took my breaks out in the lobby, or wasted time chatting with coworkers. I made any excuse not to go out by that door again. I've never before or since had any moments where I felt like my imagination got the better of me, and I truly believe that wasn't the case here. I keep thinking back to that door handle jerking down when I was not touching it anymore. That had to be proof I wasn't imagining the whole thing. I don't work nights anymore, but for years I worked the night shift in a residential care facility. On weekends, I was the only person in charge of a dementia facility. It was sometimes spooky, consisting of 15 residents and only me to keep an eye on them all throughout the night. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where I checked on all the residents and they were safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I went and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. I blew it off as being a hallucination because I was exhausted most of the nights. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, so I went back to the window and checked again. Nobody was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked there. I took a photo of it just in case, and then I went back to my station where I had been playing a game of cards with a delightful but very demented lady. I sat down and she looked at me and said, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. However, the doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was getting scared. Another one of my residents was awake and walking in the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before continuing to pretend to paint. I looked out of the window to see the same car as before, and as I was looking around, I saw a shadow moving in front of the door. A person walked around the corner and then looked straight into the window next to me. We made direct eye contact, and it was essentially a jump scare for me, so I was startled and screamed. My residents started freaking out, and the guy on the other side of the door ran away. I called the police, and they showed up shortly after. It was straight chaos at that point, because I had 15 residents who all had been woken by the commotion, and 2 police officers in the building now also. Eventually, with the help of the 2 kind officers, I was able to get everybody settled down, but it took a while. I eventually learned from the cops that there was a woman down the road whose house was broken into. She was attacked in bed by someone who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if it was the same person from earlier that night intentionally trying to get into my facility for the drugs that are kept there. I'm grateful that our whole facility was so secure, and apparently the culprit just took the next best option. A strange part of the story that I'll never understand is how 2 of my patients knew that there was a man out there who wanted to enter and potentially hurt me. They were never close enough to the door to look out of the window and see anyone. It feels like one of those eerie guardian angel moments, or just a strange coincidence. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. When I was younger, I used to work at a sporting goods store for a while. I played sports growing up and I always liked them, so I figured it would be a cool place to work. And it was. I was familiar with most of the things that we sold in the store, and I also got a good discount. When I worked, I would do a little bit of everything. Sometimes I would be a cashier, and other times I would stock shelves and stuff. Our store also never really seemed to get that busy, except for some weekends and things like that. So one time I was working and I was out in the store, mostly restocking shelves and things like that. I had moved all around the store, and by this time I was in the far left side of the store in one of the aisles. These were the aisles where a lot of sports equipment was. The store was not really that busy, just a few customers were around here and there shopping, and I think it was me and 3 other coworkers. So as I was over there, out of nowhere I saw this baseball come rolling into my aisle. Obviously we sold baseballs, but I didn't know why one would be rolling towards me. I went over and I picked it up. That's when I saw another baseball come flying in my direction. It missed me and hit one of the shelves in the aisle that I was in. I realized that somebody had thrown the ball in my direction. I looked around but couldn't tell who had done it. They must have hidden or something. I called out asking who did that, but nobody answered me. I then went back into my aisle hoping that it was just a one-time thing. Well, it wasn't. Not even 30 seconds later, another ball came whizzing into the aisle, also hitting a shelf, and thankfully not hitting me. This was dangerous, and I felt like I had to stop whoever was doing this, so I walked back out of the aisle and looked around again. I started walking around the nearby area and looking all over the place, but I couldn't find anyone. Eventually, I saw a customer, but it was an older lady, and I didn't really think that she had done it. But I did ask her if she had seen anybody with baseballs or anything. She said no, though. I went over to the baseballs and nobody was in that aisle. So after that, I went up to the front of the store and I told my coworkers about it. None of them had seen the guy or anything, so I asked them to be aware if they saw somebody with baseballs or something. Then I went back to work in the same aisle that I had been. When I was walking over there though, I thought that I saw the guy. After passing by the baseballs again, I saw a younger man holding a baseball in his hand. I could not confirm that this was the guy, but it seemed like too much of a coincidence to me. He looked at me when I passed him, and then he turned in the other direction and started walking away. I almost said something, but I didn't. I couldn't prove that he was the guy, and he was now walking off, so I just kept going as well. When I got to the aisle again where I'd been working, I continued with my work like before. For about 5 minutes or so, things were fine. Then, out of nowhere, I heard somebody approaching. I looked to the end of the aisle. I saw the same man come around the corner. Except now, he was wearing football shoulder pads as well as a football helmet. He had clearly just gotten both from our football aisle, which was nearby. Then the man started sprinting, literally charging straight for me. I braced myself for the impact, and the man ran right into me, knocking me over. I heard him start laughing a little, and then he ran out of the aisle. I quickly got to my feet and then left the aisle to go after the man. I was furious now, and I knew that this was a big problem. The man continued running and turned down one of the main aisles. I chased after him, and he actually ran pretty fast. Soon he was heading towards the front part of the store. I continued behind him, and we reached the checkout area where my coworkers were. The man ran right past all of them, and then right out of the doors, leaving the store entirely. My coworkers were looking around, not really sure what they had just seen. The guy ran through the parking lot and then off the property and out of sight. He was still wearing the helmet and pads, which he didn't pay for, so he had basically stolen them. We called the police and they came out and did a report of the guy. They said they would look around for him. After that, I never heard anything more though, and I never saw the guy again. I'm not really sure why he did that, but that was by far the craziest thing to ever happen while I worked there.